Hi there. This is Annabelle, your friendly psychologist, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of humanistic and Jungian thought. My name's Annabelle Nelson. My PhD is actually in psychology, developmental and child psychology. And you're lucky at Fielding, we're transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. So you have sociologists, you have anthropologists, you have people in social work, and I'm not the lone psychologist, but we don't have that many anymore. We used to have Judy Stevens Long and Stephen Murphy Shigematsu, and I believe Abigail, your faculty degree is in psychology as well. But some people criticize psychology as being just focused on the individual. But I assure you, I see psychology as a systems field, that people are interconnected. And also we take into account particularly in humanistic psychology, we take into account all the factors in a person's life and in a community's life. A lot of my work's been in community psychology. Okay, I want to alert you to my website, annabellenelson.com. As you can see on the screen, there's an essay on human development. And there's also a human development scope and trends, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and that's on my website. So I have done a lot of work over the years. I've been at Fielding 26 years. I got my PhD in 78. So I have a pretty long career at this point, and here are some of my publications. You can see I've worked in special education with distractible children. I worked on the Thana-Atham tribe in southern Arizona, looking at creativity. I've worked in brain physiology, which was so big in the late 80s with the right brain, left brain. But I was interested in the inner brain, the limbic system that regulates sensations and emotions and long-term memory. Living the Wheel is about imagery and emotional health and dealing with some, I think the subtitle is about bliss and terror as well. I had a nonprofit, the Wheel Council, Holistic Health Education Empowerment for Life. And we had many grants to do substance abuse prevention and HIV prevention. And we worked with preteens in downtown Phoenix, Thana-Atham Nation, East LA, and other places. That's a couple of those article publication. And in 2014, I published a book on archetypal imagery. And that's when we get to Jung, that's where that fits. And storytelling, you see the little storytelling doll, has been a big part of my work. And you see the moon down there. The big distinction of humanistic and Jungian thought in reference to other human development traditions is that there is an unconscious, and it has a huge motivating factor on our lives. And opening the unconscious is one way of moving towards human potential, healing, and learning. Of course, psychoanalytic tradition, which I think you had at your last session, believes in the unconscious as well. I don't know if belief is the right word, posits the unconscious. So I want to give a shout out to Google Scholar. It's really improved. I used to think you had to go to libraries to find things and that the internet would just give you popular stuff, but Google Scholar is great. As you can see, this is my page on Google Scholar. I want to encourage you all to have a Google Scholar account and link it with the Fielding Graduate University Library. And I believe the library has directions on how to do that. And then when you put something in the bar you're searching for, like human development organizations or Jung and organizations, or those of you in the human development PhD, Jung and reduce community nonprofits, for example, then it will actually show you what the library has in terms of full text. So I encourage you to do that. Okay, this was the human development trend chart I mentioned that's on my website, annabellenelson.com, grad student tab. And I want to say this is mine because I think if Abigail gave you one or Steve gave you one or or the other human development, Miguel, Connie, Valerie, they would have a different one, right? So this is mine. But I think in your human development studies, it's good to, it's about developing humans, right? That's human development, it's be a little circular, but it's developing towards something, right? And I think another unique concept that Jungian and humanistic thought posits is that we're moving to wholeness. We're not like climbing a ladder. Although Maslow's kind of the beginner, founder of humanistic psych, we might say, and he did have his need hierarchy where certain conditions are met, like the bottom if you had food and shelter, and then you go up and you have your social needs met. But eventually you get to the top of the pyramid and you're self-actualized, there's self-actualization. So, I guess they're just kind of lenses for looking at these theories. But I do think that more humanistic and Jungian is about wholeness, of going in and becoming a whole person versus certainly there are, like we look at Keegan, Kohlberg, and Piaget. Well, primarily Piaget and Kohlberg over here in terms of cognitive development or moral development. There's a very specific set of stages. And when you get to the top, then you're fully developed. So back to the point where when you choose where you're going to reside in human development, and I assume you will, either in organizational development change or human development, think about where humans are developing to, or what is the goal of human development. So I put all these things up at the top. I'm sorry that you don't see the whole chart, but I wanted to be big enough on the PowerPoint so you could see it. But up here, are you reflective? Are you efficacious? Are you enlightened? Are you happy? Positive psychology. Are you emotionally mature? Are you individuated? That's a Jungian term, I would say. But emotionally mature, I think, overlaps humanistic psychology and overlaps over here post-formal cognitive development that's also called constructivist. Emotional maturity is part of that bailiwick, we might say, but spiritual, and then we have wise over here that's cut off. So what I'm going to talk about today is down here on the right side with Jung and humanistic psych. And then personally, I feel like I combine those two, but I'm more into consciousness studies because that combines indigenous thought, brain physiology, and archetypal kinds of things as well. Okay, let's get right to it. Humanistic psychology, Maslow and Rogers are the main figures. And I put years of their seminal or ovarian, if we're feminist, books, 1954. Actually, I didn't realize that their books came out about the same time. But I won't read these statements because I assume you're watching this and you could read them. But there is a creative force in the unconscious that, given the right conditions, so there you have it, that psychology isn't all about individual development because the right conditions is the environment around one. But given the right conditions, a person, and people apply this to organizations and family systems as well, and we could apply it to cultures. Given the right conditions, it will lead people and systems towards positive growth. Here I have psychologically and cognitively here. And so the goal is to tap the hidden potential, the human potential, by creating environments that allow that to emerge. And I already talked about Maslow and his need hierarchy, and he studied peak performers like Albert Schweitzer, who was a Nobel Prize winner in Africa that went there to be a doctor to help people. So he studied people like that to figure out his theory. And Rogers, I'm pretty much believe, used his clinical practice, but he also dovetailed on Maslow's theory. because Maslow's theory is, you know, if you have the right conditions in each step of the pyramid, then you'll go to the next. But I think Rogers would more say you go in if you have the right conditions. It's more like a concentric circle. If you have the right conditions, you will move towards healing, growth, etc. Now, Fritz Perls is often identified with the humanistic movement too. He was a little different. You know, Rogers was all about empathy and positive regard, and Fritz Perls was more confrontational. So you might have heard about T groups, training groups. One of our wonderful faculty who's now passed, Charlie Seashore and Edie Seashore, were very involved in T groups. And they were these, I was actually in one for 12 hours once. And basically, you know, you just kind of go at each other. I mean, the idea is opening the unconscious, but you open it in kind of a confrontational way. Like, when I hear you say this, I hear that. You did need a really good facilitator in those groups, because bullying could happen. And that's one thing about humanistic thought. You know, boundaries are important too, which I don't think Carl Rogers talked much about. But in an environment where it's totally free and empathic and non-judgmental, sometimes the group dynamics can get a little fierce. So I think the evolution of humanistic thought in terms of Carl Rogers' original thought is that the boundaries and structure are somewhat important. Okay, so I want to point out that Fielding Graduate University really relies on humanistic psychology, which was part of the progressive educational movement of the late 60s and early 70s when we were founded. And learner-centered education is a humanistic psychological concept. So the learner's important. That means learner choice. That means valuing learner experience, valuing learner culture, ethnic, racial identity, sexual identity, gender perspective. All of those things are important. You take the learner where the learner is and allow the learner to build their education. Okay, going really quickly here. So if either of you, if anyone wants to delve into these theories, you know, my email, anelson@fielding.edu, and I can help you more. Jung's theory is a bit more complicated. So Jung was a psychiatrist, which at that time in Europe, they were MDs. Well, psychiatrists are MDs, and he worked with Freud. Actually, they were buddies. One time I was living in the mountains. Actually, I'm in the mountains right now at almost 9,000 feet. And it was a long winter break, and I got this huge biography of Jung. And there's one great story about Jung and Freud being on a ship going from Europe to the US. And Jung wanted to psychoanalyze Freud's dream, and that wasn't allowed. So I don't know if that was the breaking point, but I kind of imagined them on the ship and Freud getting all bristly like he was no longer the main guy. But anyway, so Freud, I'm not going to go into psychoanalytic theory because I think that you had that already. But as you know, there's the id in Freud's theory, and we have the superego, the ego, and the id. And the id is unconscious, and it's primal, and it's about survival and sex. So Jung broke with us and said, hey, there's something more in the unconscious. And he worked with schizophrenics, and he noticed that there were patterns in their dreams. And out of this, and he worked with other people as well, but that was the beginning. He developed the theory of the collective unconscious. So there's this dimension that's energetic that all humans share, that we can actually, that motivates us, and that we can actually tap into if we become a whole person. And so there's positive things. I mean, this overlaps humanistic, right? Because humanistic, there is the creative force in the unconscious, but this is a little more complex, that it's interconnected. But archetypes reside in the collective unconscious, and as we develop our personalities, say at the age of 1, 2, 3, we naturally identify with the archetype that drives and propels our psychological development, but this is all on an unconscious level. And Jung had 3 main archetypes: the anima, that's female. You can always know that because it has an A, or at least I know that because I'm Annabelle, and anima is female, animus is male, and the shadow. And the shadow is what is in the unconscious that is then collected to the collective unconscious. And the shadow isn't all negative, but it's also, sometimes I talk about the golden shadow. There's positive elements of our being that we're not in touch with. So this is very complicated. And so I'll try to move through this at a high level. But my work and others have moved this idea of archetype, that it's not just these 3 things, but it's an energy pattern in the unconscious that has a given characteristic. I had a student who did her dissertation on her own dreams, and she even felt, I mean, she was of Celtic origin, and she started dreaming about Celtic knots. So in her dissertation, the Celtic knot is actually an archetype that gives you an idea. So the idea is to open the shadow, and that can be done with archetypal identification. Of course, Jung did a lot of dream work, and Jungian therapists do a lot of dream work to find these archetypes. I am not a Jungian analyst, and when I love to read Jungian theory, but when they go off on their dream interpretation, it's just like, whoa, okay. So I'll talk in just a second about archetypal identification from a conscious and storytelling approach, not from a dream analysis. But just to finish off these high-level concepts, Jung, the ultimate in human development for Jung was the awareness in waking consciousness of the self with a capital S. And that's the whole of the inner being. So the shadow's an open. But Ettinger, he's got a great book, Ego and Archetype. And I have an article that kind of summarizes his ideas. Maybe I'll give that to Abigail as well, in case someone wants to dive in. But it's not like it's open and all this stuff is coming out like a schizophrenic, right? He talks about the ego self-axis. So the ego is the organizing structure of the individual that we're consciously aware of. And so he talks about the ego self-axis. So it's like consciousness can go and come. It's agile, it's flexible, it's permeable. So it's not like you're totally open to the unconscious, but the self. But you have a connection to the self that's flexible, agile, permeable. Okay, individuation is another goal of Jungian thought, and individuation is when the individual has opened awareness to the self, and so these maladaptive trauma memories in the unconscious, these storylines about the self that have been given to you by your family of origin or by society or your gender roles, they're no longer controlling you, but you're controlling yourself basically through your awareness. And I love this line from Jung, is that either your unconscious runs you or you run your unconscious. So taking a breath. I think maybe I've covered enough. I just want to give you a little image of my work. In the book Archetypal Imagery, I propose this wise mind body, where we have 4 parts of our being: mental awareness, emotion, physical, and spiritual. And so the goal of emotional maturation or ego integration, if we're looking from a constructivist view, is that instead of the ego controlling who we think we are and being tight around our identity, our awareness is softer, kinder, as human, is permeable, as you see these dotted lines. And so, and I call it the wise my body, because from brain physiology, we know that the brain and the immune system, for example, are talking, right? So we know that neurotransmitters such as endorphins can go in to the bloodstream and lock onto an immune cell, like a T cell that's going to attack a cancer, is going to attack COVID-19. So, and we do know from somatic psychology, which maybe Valerie will be talking about, our body talks to us. You know, we store a lot of things in our body. So my work includes ideas from humanistic psychology, Jungian, and I was a yogi for a long time that studied Hindu philosophy, particularly Vedantic, some things from that. And then I worked with a number of indigenous tribes in Arizona and was lucky enough to attend storytelling events and also have studied a number of indigenous scholars and then brain physiology. Okay, so you may wonder, could I just be eclectic and I can be, you know, I can believe in positive psychology and humanistic psychology, not believe, that's the wrong word again, but I can adhere to those approaches. One thing I want to say is these theories are quite complex. So sometimes mixing oranges and apples doesn't quite work. So you kind of know whose shoulders you're going to stand on if you're going to include human development, for example, in your dissertations. And also I've noticed that many of you are amazing practitioners. You're out there in the world of work. And there's these packages for like executive coaching or a package in counseling. And you want to do your dissertation on one of these very applied specific packages. And I just encourage you to find the roots, find the theoretical research, conceptual roots, and realize that not all things are alike in human development. So I wanted to bring up one example, which there's a big controversy between positive psychology and humanistic psychology now. Like positive psychologists like Seligman are saying that humanistic psychology isn't based on data, right? And humanistic psychologists will say, well, you know, we do have, there's experimental data and there's empirical data, you know, and then there's experiential data, like things have been tried and tried and tried, for example, in case studies. But most people don't realize that Seligman's work is from doing electric shock with dogs on learned helplessness. And he built on another piece of work on learned helplessness where they had mice or rats, I can't remember which, in tubs of water and seeing if they could save themselves or if they just gave up and they had learned helplessness. So if you're interested in looking at this controversy, and I'm just bringing this up as an example that it does make a difference where you align your work. Maybe in positive psychology, you want quantitative data and coming from animal research makes sense to you. I'm not, for me personally, I mean, I do like hard data. I have a behavioral psych background. So in the work I've done in community psychology, we do surveys with Likert scales, et cetera, and do statistics. So I'm not against data, but part of this is the epistemology or the methods of knowing that you feel comfortable about. This article is more about animal rights, I think, but it does give you a background of where the data for positive psychology came from. And a humanistic might criticize a positive psychologist because positive psychology is based on positivistic, I mean circular, and cognitive thought. It probably denies that there is an unconscious that motivates us. So I've pulled two articles for you. You can read the title. This is about archetypes and organizational change management. And I have a quote here from the article. So basically, they are saying that organizations have reward mechanisms. They actually use the word schemes, reward schemes for reinforcing a certain archetype in the organization. And what does that do to the people in the organization? And they do talk about the shadow. They talk about archetypes and mirroring in this article. Mirroring means the person's trying to be the archetype. They're trying to mirror it, right? And so this is my first piece of reflection writing. Write about a family system or organization setting where you reside. What primary archetype is being rewarded through symbols and practices? What might be in the shadow, you know, another archetype that would benefit the whole person and the organization? And what symbols or practices might you introduce to open this up? The other article I pulled is more from Humanistic Psych. They quote a lot about Rogers. And this is another organization article. So I'm sorry for the human development folks, but you might be in a nonprofit, right? Or you might be in clinical practice where there's people are interacting with each other. But this article, don't know how to pronounce his name, Coughlin, pulls out the 3 conditions that Rogers gives for having a growth promoting climate. Actually, there's a lot of somatic thought within, or body awareness thought within Rogers, because congruence is like, sometimes people are saying one thing, but their body's saying something different, you know, and so congruence deals with somatic thought as well. Okay. So, and you have to be really clear on what empathy is if you're understanding a person-centered approach, a humanistic approach. It's not sympathy. It's trying to feel what walking in the other person's shoes, so to speak. So there's some boundaries and clarity involved in the humanistic approach. But okay, here's your writing assignment. Think of a specific difficult scene within a system you reside. Write about the specific scene. And I would like to see a lot. I mean, I guess I'm not going to read them. I'm not sure. I have to check with Abigail, but I'm hoping for this exercise to work. I want you to get into the multisensory approach of this scene. That opens up that limbic system, that opens up the long-term memory and the emotions. So who's there? Who's talking? What's happening? It's a difficult scene that's been a recent event. So really write about that scene. I'd say at least a page, maybe a page and a half. And then using Rogers conditions above, what would you shift? You know, how might you shift that scene from difficulty to growth? And this is pretty open-ended. It's a bit ambiguous, which I wanted. I wanted you to be a little creative, because humanistic thought isn't like necessarily intervention. It's not necessarily something really direct. It can be a subtle shift. Okay. Well, thank you very much for letting me share with you my take on humanistic and Jungian thought.